Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. The average ransomware payment in Australia is now $1.35 million. It seems businesses are increasingly willing to pay to regain access to computer systems and data locked up by cybercriminals. Every year we talk to the team at McGrathNicol about this because not only do they help companies prepare for and deal with these attacks, they also monitor the overall ransomware threat facing Australian businesses. Darren Hopkins and Payne are cyber partners at McGrathNicol Advisory, which is a great supporter of this podcast. Darren, Brendan, welcome back to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
For the 4 years now, McGrathNicol's partnered with YouGov to survey 500 Australian business owners, partners, directors, C-suite leaders across businesses. We're talking about companies with 50 plus employees here to work out the ransomware threat facing Australian businesses. Darren, why did McGrathNicol start the research and what trends have you seen over the past 4 years or so?
Sean, I was looking at this only on the weekend as I was going through the draft results of this particular year's survey, and we've been doing it for 4 years. And I still remember that 4 years ago, we were in the position of seeing a lot of businesses pay ransoms, and we couldn't ourselves understand why businesses are so likely to step up and, given my background in law enforcement, to pay a criminal money for an extortion. It seemed incredible. So we started the research there, and at the time I had just finished a job where our client had effectively just had to find $7 million US to pay a Russian-based cyber criminal group to get their systems back up and running and actually to continue business. And they needed to do it to operate. They were in a really bad position. And 6 months after that event, I was with the team. We were talking to the executives and the board about a budget to improve the business, to defend itself going forward, all the things that you would hope a business does. And we were able to get $500,000 over 3 years to work on the problem. And at that time, I thought, well, how is it that we can pay 10 million Aussie to a ransomware group, but we can only find this little amount of money? And why is it that we're doing it so often? That's why we started doing the research. It was a little bit of I'd like to know more. And we were trying to understand the drivers behind why we're doing that so that maybe we can help businesses avoid having to do that.
Brendan, what about the headline results this year? We've just heard why you're doing the survey. How has the ransomware threat changed since this time last year?
It's a good question, Sean. There are a lot of key findings from our 2024 survey, so I'll do my best to talk to the critical ones and the ones that really stand out. But what it does show is, or reveal, is that 84% of Australian businesses that experienced a ransomware attack in the past 5 years actually chose to pay the ransom. Additionally, 75% of these businesses reported paying the ransom within 48 hours, which remains unchanged from last year. Now, according to the research, there has been a significant increase in ransomware payments, with the average payment soaring to 1.35 million Australian dollars. Now, that's up from just over $1 million in 2023. Now, interestingly, 83% of businesses, including those that haven't yet been attacked, stated that they would be willing to pay a cyber ransom. And 79% of executives believe it should be mandatory for businesses to report a ransomware attack. Now, if we look at the groups responsible for these attacks, among respondents whose business experienced an attack in the past 5 years, almost 28% of these can be tied back to just two threat groups known as Lockbit and Ransom Hub. But overall, Sean, what we're seeing is a return to the highs of the results we saw in 2022.
What amazes me in this, Darren, is that people are so willing to pay. Like, particularly given government legislation and all the talk about it, but people in these high-pressure situations seem willing to pay.
Yeah, it feels that way. Funny enough, no one wants to pay, and that is clear. Every time we're in an incident or in a crisis with a business, they absolutely, under no circumstance, want to actually go through a process of having to pay an extortion, which is what that is. A lot of businesses feel that it's the right thing to do, and unfortunately, we've got ourselves into a position where we can justify those actions quite easily. One of the things that we do is we do tabletop simulations with businesses almost every week. We're simulating a cyber attack with a board or an executive and running through, this type of event. And often, even in those simulations, we're seeing businesses can justify that this is the right thing to do. The research this year showed a shift in what we saw last year. So last year, what we saw is that businesses were going to pay because they were going to minimize harm to others. So at this point, we've lost someone's data. We've got a situation where the threat is we are going to leak all this information out or misuse that information to cause other people harm. That information that you're trying to safe keep. That was a real push by threat actor groups to try to encourage us to make those payments. They're always changing their tactics to be better. This year, though, the research shows that just as many times as that threat that still exists of I want to protect businesses from making it any worse than I already have because this has happened, they're needing to pay to get their operations back up and running. So the business needs to get back up and running quick. They need to get their systems up and running because of generally the costs of being down are quite significant. And what we're definitely seeing is that the longer you are down, the more impact your supply chain and the businesses around you, and the more pressure that you will feel on your brand.
Stay with me. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Darren Hopkins and Brendan Payne, cyber partners at McGrathNicol Advisory. Okay, Brendan, when a business leader is facing a ransomware attack, what are they considering? I'm sure there must be, other hidden costs, non-obvious impacts to the businesses that the executive has to think about well beyond the 1.35 million, which is the average payout.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, Darren and I and the McGrathNicol team work quite closely with businesses regularly on cyber incidents. And I think what we see most is the importance of being able to respond quickly in order to contain the attack and ultimately minimize the damage, some of which Darren just spoke to. So this is where a best practice incident response plan is really critical and key for an organization. It details the roles and responsibilities in the event of an attack, including decisions on whether the business will pay a ransom and negotiate. It outlines recovery steps, communication plans, and the details of a person responsible for reporting the incident to the authorities and external advisors if necessary. Now, in relation to the costs, whether it's hidden or unexpected, there could be a financial impact associated with downtime or business interruption and recovery efforts. This is where a cyber insurance policy can really pay off. Reputation or brand damage should also be considered, leading to a loss of customer trust in businesses. I think we've seen that numerous times in the sort of past couple of years. And depending on what information has been compromised, there's also a risk of data loss and intellectual property having a long-lasting effect on the business. And finally, the last thing I'll add is the organisation may face legal and regulatory consequences, which could result in potential fines or for non-compliance, which obviously has a cost attributed to it as well.
Okay, so that leads us into the idea, Darren, of the federal government's proposed mandatory ransomware reporting changes. What does the survey say about businesses' attitudes towards reporting? When will they kick in? Do you think they'll have the desired effect?
Yeah, so the changes that are coming through at the moment with this new cybersecurity bill that's been put forward, which has a section in there around mandatory reporting of a ransom payment to businesses, has been something we've been watching for a while. A few years ago, there was going to be a ransomware bill itself, and there was bipartisan approval for this bill to go through. And they were even talking back then about potentially making it not legal, so banning payments, and maybe with some safe harbor provisions around in certain circumstances it might be okay, but generally we didn't want anyone to be able to pay. I still think that would have been the best outcome, because what we've got now is this regime where if you pay a ransom, you've got 72 hours to report that back to the government, and if you don't report that, there's a small penalty of non-reporting, 60 penalty units, $8,000 or $9,000. Not a lot of not a significant penalty by any means. So when we asked during the survey what businesses thought about reporting generally, the vast majority, 79%, said, yes, we think we should be reporting these ransomware attacks to the government. So there doesn't seem to be any angst around reporting if it's legal. And quite often I'm seeing businesses justify this because their insurance even covers it. If our insurer's going to pay for the ransom payment, then it can't be that bad. they will make the decision they think their business needs. And if they just have to report, then so be it. I think the government was hoping that this might be a mechanism to reduce the likelihood of people paying, because you can't keep it secret. You've got to talk and tell the government about it. The other thing I don't particularly agree with the Act is that it has a small business provision. It's for businesses over $3 million that have to report. Our survey deliberately looks at small business, SME, large and enterprise. And our stats show that it's a large number of smaller businesses are getting hit. That's the vast majority of the businesses that don't have the controls for victim and pay, and they're going to be exempt anyway.
Darren, can they afford the ransomware? Can they afford the amount of money being asked of them, small business?
This is where I think the threat actor groups, these hacking groups are really good. Their business isn't to go off and try to ask a small business to pay $10 million. That they get to know who they've successfully attacked, and they'll make sure that the extortion amount fits within the mechanism and the means for that business to pay, and quite often it might be around 5% of their revenue. So it's not an easy amount of money to find, but certainly every time we've seen these things, most businesses can afford it, and you can negotiate. And we've seen the negotiations where we say we can't afford that much money. It's been a tough year. It's post-COVID, and they will come back and give you a discount until you can get to a point that you're both comfortable. Not that you'll ever be comfortable paying.
No, I don't think so. Brendan, more than 90% of executives say that their organisations are prepared for a ransomware attack. Is that what you're seeing in terms of actual preparedness on the ground?
Yeah, having worked dozens of incidents this year alone, Sean, it's a surprising number. That's for certain. Look, compared to previous years, more respondents believe their business is prepared in responding to a cyber attack. So I think it's 93% in this year's results, up from 88% in 2023, inclusive of nearly 1 in 2, so 48% who believe their business is very prepared to respond, and that was up from 35% last year. Now, just 3 in 10 or 28% of respondents who don't have or are unsure if their business has an incident response plan say their business is very prepared in responding to an attack, which is interesting because I can assure you, if you don't have an incident response plan in place, then you're likely not prepared to respond to one. Those in larger businesses, so by larger I'm referring to 250 employees or more, are more likely to say that their business is very prepared in responding to an attack than those with, say, 50 to 249 employees. And finally, those in newer companies aged up to 10 years are more likely than those in older companies over 10 years to believe their business is very prepared in responding to a cyber attack. So, yeah, certainly some interesting results there.
Yeah, so they're the numbers. Darren, do you think, you've tracked this for a few years now, do you think that senior execs are now more prepared for ransomware attacks broadly? Just sort of almost a gut feel as much as anything.
Look, executives and boards are absolutely aware of the risk and they know the issue. The regulators are making it very clear to all those business leaders that this is something you have to be prepared for, you have to plan for, and you have to demonstrate as an executive or an owner or as a director that you're doing enough. And the penalties that we're seeing come out of these regulators for getting this wrong are significant. We're talking, fines of $50 million and more for getting this wrong. And we're all now also seeing ASIC and other regulators being very vocal about those obligations. So, yes, businesses are aware and are doing a lot more. And we're actually even starting to see businesses asking to do more preparedness type work. But is it enough? And, Australia is a country with a lot of small business. Vast majority of our businesses out there are smaller businesses. They don't have the funds or the support to do enough. And we are seeing them fall victim, and they will make generally a call around what's going to be right for their business, and it may not be the right thing in any event for others. But at the moment, they're pretty much exempt from these issues. I know small businesses are still exempt from the Privacy Act around notifiable data breaches. So, it is one of those things that's just going to continue to need change.
Finishing the podcast on an upbeat note, Darren, what are the positive trends that have emerged?
Look, there is certainly some positives that come out. We've seen more businesses seeing that insurance to safeguard their business is something important. There's something they put in place. Interestingly enough, Brendan was sort of suggesting and was talking to the planning and the work that businesses are doing to get ready. It is, and we are seeing some of those trends come up. And there's obviously a significant investment in the last 12 months businesses have made to be prepared for this to happen. And certainly everyone knows of the problem. So they're all good things. There's never a real high you can end on when we're talking about ransomware in my book. The one thing we would love to see is something that really does turn the dial in this country and makes it difficult or impossible for us to keep supporting organised crime in the way that we are. And whilst I understand it completely why this happens and how we're protecting individuals and we're protecting businesses, we've just got ourselves into this position where it's a business that will continue for a very long time unless something really changes.
Darren, Brendan, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
That was Darren Hopkins and Brendan Payne, cyber partners at McGrathNicol Advisory, which is a great supporter of this podcast. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.